This is a Heart and Hand production.
Hello and welcome back to Tactics Talk Bitesize. I'm your host, Adam Thornton, and on today's show we're going to have a look at a box midfield, or how Rangers might look to set up a box midfield under Michael Beale for the new season. Let's start with explaining, I guess, what a box midfield is. In old money, it's probably more like a midfield diamond, if you like. Brazil have used it famously, I think, in the 50s or 60s, but then also maybe more recently, they used it as a way to fit in their attacking talent around about the turn of the century, maybe a little bit later. So I think the days of Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Kaká, Rivaldo, Denilson, those were players who maybe weren't naturally wide players. So Brazil thought of a way to try and bring them into the pitch, all of them at the same time, and they sort of fell upon I guess a 4-2-2-2, if you like, with them being the front four. Manuel Pellegrini as well used it to great success at Real Madrid, probably most famously, and that allowed him to play two strikers, usually Cristiano Ronaldo or Karim Benzema, but they had Raul and Higuain who would come in there as well, but also let them select two number 10s in behind, again, maybe Kaká, Guti, those type of players spring to mind. So not using natural width, but using the sort of four attackers in the centre of the pitch. More recently than that, it's also had significant success in Germany with the rise of gegenpressing, but I guess most famously there it's been used by the Red Bull teams, again as a sort of 4-2-2-2 formation, to allow them to narrow the pitch and aggressively press the opposition in the middle when they've got the ball and spring those fast counter-attacks that we know the Red Bull teams are famous for. Bringing it to England, I guess, Ralph Hasenhüttl has used that, or did use that a little bit, I should say, at Southampton. Again, someone who's came from Red Bull, more used to that sort of high energy, restricting the pitch, reducing width and trying to attack from the middle. So he used that at Southampton to pretty good effect, certainly at the start of his time there. I guess that box naming convention comes from the fact that they are usually, as you can see on the screen here, two attacking midfielders and two deeper midfielders, or a double pivot, if you like, making this sort of box shape that we can see in the middle of the park. I guess one of the big plus points of this setup for me is just what we've said. They've been able to swamp teams centrally when we're trying to build from the back. With that double pivot in midfield, teams can still have a back four, if you like, and even use a attacking wing back. So you can still have that back four solidity there. In this case, with Raskin, Jack, Suter, and Goldson providing that base, but you can let your wing backs or your full backs go forwards, and that should allow enough defensive support against teams that are set up in the way that this team are in a kind of 4-2-3-1 formation. You've still got man for man at the back should you turn over the ball and the opposition can come and attack you. So I guess that's how it works in theory. That's how other teams have used it in the past, but how might this apply to Rangers as of right now, summer 2023? So I think Rangers would look to use this setup in midfield for the same reasons that I've mentioned above, to try and get possession of the ball in central areas. I think that's key, higher up the park than we have done in the past, and what that will then do is allow us to create better opportunities to score more goals. The overall formation that I've listed here, this sort of box, I'll just try and make it a little bit more obvious as to what I mean here when I'm talking about the box. So that is this area of the park here. The middle of the park here, you can see Rangers have an overload. They've got Raskin, Cifuentes, Jack, and Cantwell here. Obviously, Cifuentes hasn't signed yet. At the time of recording, I believe it's just been confirmed that he will be signing a pre-contract, or he has signed a pre-contract, but as of yet, he's not currently a Rangers player. We'll see how things go with that over the next few weeks. But just for the purposes of this, I think he fits this system really well, so I've included him in here. Looking at this just now, it's not too dissimilar to how Rangers played under Steven Gerrard, with the sort of 4-3-2-1 formation that we had before. Maybe you might have had Raskin sitting deeper, Jack being wider, maybe Cifuentes in there as a sort of left central midfielder, and then you'd have Cantwell, Danilo, another one who hasn't signed yet but has been heavily rumoured. I've just put him in here as a again, someone I think would work quite well in this system. But it was maybe more akin to this as a kind of 4-3-2-1 at that point. But as you can see with the box, if we go back to that, it's just a little bit more attacking. You've got Cifuentes and Cantwell pushed up. Danilo obviously would be pushed up next to Dessers, and then Raskin and Jack as a more deeper base. But overall, it is very more attacking than we had before. So it gives you that control that we spoke about in those central areas. So which I think is a big thing that Rangers really need to get to. If we look at Rangers playing against a sort of 4-2-3-1, as we probably did for most of last season, we can see immediately where Rangers should be able to overload the opposition. The two centre forwards, Dessers and hopefully Danilo in this case, match up against the centre backs man for man. That's very good for Rangers. It means they don't have the spare man there, and we can go man for man and try and create opportunities. Our fullbacks, in this case, we've got Ridvan and James Tavernier, can provide the width, so they can push up against the opposition's fullbacks, and again, go man for man there. That again provides a really good overload there, if you like, in the middle of the park, because you're stretching that play out there. You're occupying the fullbacks and the centre defence, meaning they can't step into midfield and help out with the opposition. So that's good news on that side. The fullbacks are the only area of this system, I guess, that can provide the natural width. I think in this situation, the fullbacks aren't the main creative outlet, so that's going to be a big change for Rangers in the future if we did decide to use this in this way. Their roles in this team, for me, are more about what I just said. They're generating space for others to play in, so dragging players out of position to allow the likes of Cifuentes and Cantwell to move into these half spaces and create opportunities for overloads in these areas. So that's how I see the fullbacks working, more of a, I guess, an out of possession role than the in possession that they've had in the past. What we then see then obviously is with that, there's that overload there that we mentioned. We've got 4 against 3 in the middle of the park. Importantly, I think for this is not only does that give you an overload there, but it also means that if Suter and Goldson can get on the ball here. So, for example, Suter on the ball here, and we get Raskin and Jack playing in the box and dealing with those players. If Suter can get this ball through to Cantwell, or Goldson can get it through to Cifuentes, or vice versa, immediately you can turn it around and you can see there's an overload here. Cantwell can bring the ball into here. Dessers and Danilo. It's a 3 versus 2 against there, against the opposition centre backs, which I think is really, really useful. On the flip side of that, you're ensuring then that moving one player out of the box, Rangers still have 3 in here against the opposition's 3. So that's really important as well, because that creates that balance. If Cantwell loses the ball, we're still got a lot of cover behind the ball, which I think is really, really useful. So there's sort of 2 sides to that. There's what we can do in possession, and then once we lose out of possession, how well structured we are behind the ball, which I think is going to be key. Another way, I guess, we spoke about maybe creating the space there and getting the ball through, but another way we could maybe look to do this is, as I mentioned, if maybe Cantwell drifts a little bit wider into that space and maybe draws some of the other opposition players with him, what we can try and do there is look to sort of get the ball into these areas and again overloads on this side, for example, while still maintaining that defensive solidity in the middle of the park. So there are quite a few interesting avenues that can be opened there. As with everything, though, there does need to be a bit of a trade-off. The team should always have that balance nicely between attack and defence and not be caught out on the counter-attacks. We know Michael Beale propensity for control behind the ball. We've seen Jack and Lundstrom play probably more than most people would want or would think is necessary, but they do tend to always play. But what I think we could see here is something slightly different. Mentioned there that we'll see maybe some of the fullback play being limited. Maybe they won't be as tasked with being as hugely a creative outlet as they have been in the past. And given the lack of width in this system, I think the days of the fullbacks rampaging up the park and crossing the ball into the box may be gone, or at least going. Obviously, Borna Barisic at this point in time is still a Rangers player, but I know there's been some rumours about him potentially leaving. If he does leave, then I think that change of style should happen organically, because Ridvan is a very, very different type of player to Barisic, so that should happen organically. But I think that the days of firing up there and getting the ball into the box are probably going, certainly on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, obviously, we've got James Tavernier. I think most people will think he will probably start the season. However, I do think Sterling will be quite an interesting player when he comes in. If you look at the profile of Sterling, and I guess the profile of Ridvan, they're very, very opposite. They're very different to the other two in Barisic and Tavernier. Barisic much more of a get forwards into this area of the park. See if I can find Barisic on here first of all. Where is he? All the way back here. So Barisic much more likely to get the ball in this area and try and swing it in. Here, less likely to be involved, maybe in inverting into the middle of the park in the way that a Ridvan would do. And Barisic, I don't think, not as comfortable on his weaker foot either, in terms of being able to drift inside or even cut back and play in field a little bit. So that sort of limits us a little bit. So with Barisic possibly leaving, or possibly Ridvan being the starter, I think that opens up some really interesting angles there. But I do think it will mean that the numbers will be less impressive from the fullbacks. And I think that's the same on the opposite side. If you look at Dujon Sterling, he is not going to be a Tavernier, I don't think. He's not going to be someone that's going to be coming in at the back post and scoring, or even getting to the byline and trying to whip balls into the box. I don't think that's really going to be his skill set. I think he's going to be much more, like I said, an opposite of Tavernier. He's going to be more focused on what happens behind the halfway line, and dealing with the defensive side of it, which will be something that's really, really crucial, I think, for providing additional cover should the team lose the ball and face those counter-attacks. An interesting part, I guess, of this sort of box, if you like, is then what could happen before, if you like, what happens during build-up that might mean that we can still use the box, but in slightly different ways. So if you think, for example, possibly we might not play Cifuentes, we might not even sign Cifuentes, but maybe we would have Sam Lammers playing, and we might maybe look at maybe Dessers playing, Lammers playing up top, and then going back to maybe more of a sort of traditional three with two strikers being wider and one up front. Again, we've got that three in here, which is fine. It's sort of balanced up, but you don't have that overload that we're looking for. What I think could be quite an interesting thing to do is we could then see, maybe once we're in possession, we could see Ridvan coming in, and maybe Raskin moving a little bit forward, Ridvan coming in with the ball even from fullback, creating that box in the middle, creating that overload. But instead of maybe what we're used to with Tavernier bombing up the wing, we could see maybe Sterling coming in to form a back three at points. Not suggesting that we'll play a back three every minute of every game, or even start many games with it, or that Ridvan would play central midfield. That's definitely not the case. But just in possession, I think we could see things like this happening to try and get overloads in these areas. And obviously with Sterling being more of a defender than an attacker, that option there to have him tucking in when needed, and Ridvan moving forward into midfield to give us that overload could be interesting. But I do think that would be maybe something that we might see at various phases within games, not necessarily as a sort of starting point. So you're almost having, I guess, three attackers up top rather than the two, but then you're sort of using Ridvan as well. You're obviously going to give away quite a bit of width in this sort of situation, because it's effectively a 3-4-3 now rather than a 4-4-2 or a 4-2-2-2. So yeah, I don't think this would happen a lot, but it's just an interesting way to try and illustrate how things could move. What I think the main aim of this, like I said, is to generate superiority in the middle between the opposition defence and the midfield. I think that's really where Rangers need to get to. Far too often we see, like I mentioned, we see the fullbacks getting the ball here, and we've got maybe one striker in the box, and we're trying to get the ball into him and nothing really happens. Or we see us passing the ball about this area of the park, nothing really happening with it. For me, the key here is getting Cantwell and getting Lammers or whoever it is on the ball in these areas with the ability to overload. I think that's going to be really, really crucial to Rangers moving forward, to create more opportunities centrally, score more goals, which is the name of the game, given all the attacking players that we're bringing in. I guess it's important to note that Rangers had sort of been using that box midfield earlier in the season, or towards the end of last season, I should say, but it was maybe more primarily Nico Raskin playing with Jack and Lundstrom playing on either side. You had Cantwell as a 10, and then it was maybe more of a standard 4-4-2, if you like, with four midfielders in there. So that's slightly different to me. That's a little bit more defensive. As we say, we've got sort of three midfielders, if you like, that play behind the ball rather than maybe more attackers. So that's how we sort of played before. But I just think with the attacking talent that we've got, and hopefully joining Cifuentes and Danilo will hopefully be joining that in the coming weeks, if not months, then I think moving to maybe something like this could be very interesting, and could just give us that bit more of a dimension and allow us to create things a little bit better. We've not even looked at guys like Abdullah Sima or Sakala who can come in and sort of stretch the play on this side if maybe Danilo doesn't sign or we want to play with a different area. So there's lots and lots of options there. But I just think with these options, with the relative lack of wide players being recruited, there's only really Sima that's been recruited that can play wide. Plus the profiles of these two fullbacks being very different to the players that have been there before. I really think this could be something that this box midfield that Rangers have used, have messed about with towards the end of the season. It could be something that we could start to evolve even more. And hopefully this video has given a few examples of how we could look to do that.
That was a Heart and Hand production.